Ambassador Haqqani, Ambassador Roya Rahmani here, and I see a friend, Ambassador Farhad from Tajikistan here, and many friends. It's an honor to be back here at Hudson. Thank you, Ambassador Haqqani, for hosting here today and for your frequent contribution and analysis on the situation of Afghanistan and what's happening in the region. Our topic of discussion today couldn't be timelier. We are fighting a brutal, multi-layered war while simultaneously talking peace, building a self-reliant state, preparing for the presidential elections, all amid dealing with shifting regional and international uncertainty. So, what's the future of Afghanistan look like? It is a serious question for all of us, particularly as we approach peace. It's not only a concern that defines the future of Afghanistan, but also the future of our relationship with the United States, our foundational partner. Let me first speak a little bit about what Afghanistan brings to this partnership, lay out some policy lines of the Afghan government, what we expect of our partner, and then say a few words about peace before opening up for a discussion. It's no secret that today's Afghanistan is a changed country. We no longer pose a security threat to the world, and by relentlessly pursuing a reform agenda geared towards self-reliance over the past 5 years, we are gradually becoming less of a financial burden. Afghanistan has also undergone a social transformation over the past 18 years. We firmly believe in our constitution and democratic institutions. We see our future in the global community of democratic nations. We have become a leader in regional connectivity and hope to see this new regional platform utilized for stability and security. Our brave national defense and security forces are fighting not only for our sovereignty, but we are on the front lines of global war on terror, for which we have sacrificed dearly to keep at bay. We are a strategic partner for our allies in the international community, foremost the United States. We, Afghans and Americans, have come this far through great sacrifice, for which we as a nation will forever be grateful. We're indebted to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for gains as a nation and our increased security as an international community. And I thank all members of the Afghan and US military, the veterans and families of the fallen, who served in Afghanistan and who are still serving today. In 2017, with the announcement of the Trump administration's South Asia strategy, Afghanistan and the US entered a new phase of our partnership. The South Asia strategy was a game changer for the region because it was based on conditions, not artificial timelines. It put serious pressure on spoilers in our neighborhood, and it refocused the US role on training, advising, and assisting Afghan troops in pursuing counter-terror objectives in partnership with our security sector. We still believe this is the correct approach to our partnership. I would argue that this is no longer America's war in Afghanistan. Afghans are fighting their own war. The support provided by the United States is reciprocated in our coordinated and in our cooperation on shared counterterrorism and intelligence objectives. We are making staggering sacrifices in human life to defend not only our country, but also to hold at bay those forces which threaten global security. This is how we understand the partnership, and there are many reasons why we believe the partnership remains critical. Our part of the world is still a hotbed of global threats, with over a dozen terrorist groups active in the region. We believe global terrorism is a global problem, and that requires long-term global response. And Afghanistan is providing its location as a base in the region from which to counter this threat, and its soldiers to fight this threat. As NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said last year, the cost of leaving is far greater than the cost of staying. But it's not a fixed partnership. It's open to review and should be reviewed as contexts change. The Afghan government has indeed been preparing for possible changes to the partnership. Our security forces are defending our nation on their own, and we have been working hard over the past 5 years to gradually absorb more financial responsibility for our armed forces and overall operating costs of our state. There are mechanisms within our agreement, the BSA and the US-Afghanistan Compact, that allow us to discuss and reconfigure our assistance. A responsible, gradual reduction in US troops and assistance and the complete conversion of all assistance to conditions-based, on-budget assistance would allow us to gradually cover more and more costs as we continue to increase domestic revenues and develop further human and military capacities and capabilities. To that end, in January, President Ashraf Ghani sent a letter to President Donald Trump requesting that we engage in a coordinated effort to reevaluate our partnership. This is the Afghan government's understanding of our long-term partnership. Now, we would ask the United States to provide clarification on what its long-term strategy and interests are in our country. I think what no one is prepared for is a sudden change to our partnership that fall outside of the boundaries of our guiding documents, or that betray all that both our countries have invested to build over the past 2 decades. Afghans have serious concerns and fears about a process in pursuit of peace that to date has not included any Afghan representation. Let me also say a few words about the ongoing peace talks with the Taliban. The Afghan people deserve an end to the war, and there we want to establish peace while protecting our countless gains of the past 18 years. 2 or 3 years ago, talking of peace with the Taliban was not part of the day-to-day vocabulary or our priorities. However, President Ghani changed that narrative. His efforts, including ones ranging from reaching out to the region with an open offer of unconditional peace talks at the Kabul Process Conference, to the successful execution of a ceasefire in June 2018, to sharing a comprehensive roadmap for peace, and introducing a negotiating team in Geneva Conference. Peace has become more real now than ever before. The reality of peace, however, has created uncertainties that still looms large. Uncertainties exist because peace is not the equivalent of a ceasefire. Peace is a much deeper concept and has a price tag attached to it. While peace has dividends, the cost of it demands national and regional consensus. For the internal part of the peace process, we are organizing a national consultative lawyer jirga, currently scheduled for April 29, which is expected to define the scope and limits of any future direct talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. This will be followed by the 3rd round of Kabul Process Conference to discuss the regional aspects of a post-peace Afghanistan. The Afghan government has demonstrated our will for peace in action, and it is up to the Taliban now to show courage to engage in a broader and comprehensive face-to-face engagement with us. Let me also caution that peace in Afghanistan will not emerge out of any backdoor deal between the Taliban and any entity that is not the Afghan government. The Afghan government is the only legitimately elected representative of the Afghan people, and there is no substitute for that. In closing, let me reiterate that as a long-term strategic ally of the United States and the global community of democratic nations, Afghanistan now brings much to the table. We are an Islamic democracy, earnestly allied with the United States, strategically placed as a land bridge between Central and South Asia, and in the heart of a region from which many of the world's threats of terrorist groups are emanating, but which is also ripe with economic opportunities. Our state-to-state agreements, particularly the bilateral security agreement, define our current and future relationship. We have already created joint working groups to assess and examine the exact level of U.S. military presence in Afghanistan that is efficient, effective, and sustainable. We also have concrete proposals to substantially reduce U.S. expenditure in Afghanistan without impacting the security situation on the ground. Finally, our fight is for justice, freedom, and our constitutional and human rights. We will continue to defend our democratic gains, whether the U.S. forces stay or withdraw from Afghanistan. And we will not seek a replacement should the United States choose to withdraw. We believe that as long as the threat of terrorism remains a global one, Afghanistan will remain an important ally, and that is not bound to change even if peace with the Taliban is achieved. With that, I'll stop here and we'll take up to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Ambassador Mohib. You do know that there are tremendous advantages in being an ex-government official rather than being a current government official. One of the biggest of which is that one can afford a level of candor that you cannot while you are serving a government. Quite clearly, some people are confusing peace with American withdrawal. Just like the Soviets at the end of the sort of Geneva Accords way back in the late 1980s, they were so eager to get out that the Geneva Accords basically did not lay the foundations of peace for Afghanistan. In fact, if anything, they laid the foundation for the further destruction of Afghanistan. And as I was seeing the tweets by the special envoy for Afghanistan peace reconciliation, my dear friend Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad's tweets, which said, well, there are 4 elements to this peace process. One is getting a withdrawal right, then there is getting the Taliban to agree to not host international terrorists, the third is intra-Afghan dialogue, and the fourth is ceasefire. And we've accomplished the first 2. And now we'll work on the other 2. And until everything is agreed, nothing is agreed. And I thought, hasn't he got the sequence wrong? Because the withdrawal should be the end, and the ceasefire should be the first thing to be negotiated. Whereas he's negotiating the withdrawal, which is exactly what the Soviets did, that we are withdrawing, we are going. Do you feel the same way as I do on this particular aspect?
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And again, you know, our lives are at stake. We're fighting a war of, you know, for our survival. So, and since the United States is a democracy, like we are, and freedom of speech will not give us punitive measures to a country between 2 states, I'm going to be candid for the sake of our partnership and relationship in case there is any confusion. You cannot get a cat to guard your milk. The Taliban and terrorism, it's one DNA. You can withdraw. If the United States wishes to withdraw, we're absolutely fine with that. And like I said in my statement, we will not be seeking a replacement for the US. We will do with what we can. We have a reason for where we are and what we are fighting for. We're not fighting because someone else is telling us to, because we're protecting our values, our freedoms. And we will not allow an individual's rushed agreement to put that in jeopardy. We'll protect those values whether we have our allies standing with us or not. It would be better for them, for everybody, and for us, it would be easier if they were with us. And this can be done as it's convenient and affordable to those who would like and see shared value in this. Right? But you are right. If there is any peace talks, there has to be compromises that are made, both on the part of the Afghan people. Remember, the Afghan people are not separate from the Afghan state. This is a democratically elected government of the Afghan people. So to drive divisions between the Afghan people and the Afghan state is trying to undermine our institutions and to weaken us and to embolden our enemy. I don't think it's helpful for peace. Right? The first thing should be direct negotiations between the Afghan government and the insurgents who have caused us many deaths, and we would like to see justice. Thousands of Afghans have died as a result of senseless violence in Afghanistan. Why was that violence there? For what reason? Of course, there will be answers sought by those who have also died in airstrikes, who've been put in prison, private prisons run by individuals, rogue elements. We want justice for our people, wherever that is. And as a representative, as a government of the Afghan people, we seek just that. And I think our people deserve nothing less.
Why has the Afghan government not yet become part of the much wanted peace process?
Look, the Taliban has always had two requests. I would say their patrons had two requests, but hey, let's call them individual. Okay. Their request was they want to negotiate directly with the U.S. government because they said that the U.S. is the one that took them out of power, and they want to negotiate with them to settle their score. One. Second was the total withdrawal of the U.S. troops. Their position has not changed. Over the years, as pressure mounted on them, their patrons said, one meeting with the United States so the Taliban get assurances, and then there will be talks with the government. Unfortunately, through wrong and perhaps hurried negotiations, everything was put on the table in the first instance. There is no reason for the Taliban to want to do anything more than that, and they keep getting more and more milk. Why would they want to choose another option? And like you said, the sequence was absolutely wrong. As a partner in this, we haven't had enough consultation on how this should be handled. The sequences must have been right. For us, peace is important. If the issue was to reduce costs, one doesn't need to go to the Taliban to reduce costs of the engagement in Afghanistan. If the issue was withdrawal, once again, you don't need to go to the Taliban to request that. Those provisions are within the Afghan, in the bilateral security agreement. So the exercise that has been taken without due consultation with the proper representatives of the Afghan people has been futile. And I think we've got to correct the course and pursue real reconciliation, because there are elements that are reconcilable, and we must pursue those reconciliation. But we must not forget where the threat actually emanates from, and will reconciliation end that threat? So it has to be comprehensive, it has to be thoughtful, and it has to be substantive.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who keep citing, and I've been a particular critic of this argument, because I think that military missions should be, or the success of military missions should be judged not on the basis of how long they've been kept going through somebody's mistake or somebody else's, but in terms of what has been accomplished, in terms of what the mission originally was. But in this town, at least, there's just too many people who go around saying, oh gosh, 17 years, 17 years, 17 years, that's a long time, that's a long time, that's a long time. Well, from the Afghan people's point of view, you've been at war for almost 40 years, because 1917, it starts with the arrival of the Soviets in Afghanistan. there's the war against the Soviets, then there is the war that comes after the Soviets. And in all of that, of course, there is you mentioned the patrons of the Taliban. Since I'm in a particularly, shall we say, delicate position talking about the patrons of the Taliban, I will actually bounce the ball back to you. How far are the patrons of the Taliban cooperating? Because all indications from Ambassador Khalilzad seem to be that they have facilitated my being able to talk to people who for 30 years they said weren't in Pakistan or weren't in the patron place, and they have been great accommodators and facilitators. President Ghani started the process of talking to the leaders of Pakistan's military directly, the patrons' military directly, and why did that track not succeed, and where do things stand there in terms of direct communication between Kabul and the capital of your neighboring country where I once lived?
I don't know if I can keep that code, but I'll try to see.
No, you don't have to. There are codes you have to keep, and there are codes I have to keep. You know.
Well, here is a dilemma. Peace and the discussions are with the Taliban, who supposedly are an Afghan insurgency. And as a result of that, there will be peace, in our country. Well, we don't know what went on in those discussions, not to the details. The patrons, foreign minister tweets and says there was progress in Doha. What is the relationship of the Taliban with Pakistan? I have to spell it out. What is the relationship? Has anybody asked, and what does it mean? Where will it end? What will be the end of that relationship? Will peace in Afghanistan mean Pakistan no longer using proxies for their political objectives and terrorists? Will the UN raise that question of what is the policy on non-state actors? Everybody paid attention to one jet falling, when there was the tension between conventional war between Pakistan and India. But every day we are dying. Every day there are terrorists coming our way. Every day we are capturing explosives in the tons. You cannot buy 20 tons of explosives in a supermarket and tell us that that's how the procurement happened. These are done by orangutan students who manage to arrange all of that. These attacks and the sophistication of it is obviously a state behind. There is no question about any of that. And until we resolve that, what peace are we talking about? Imagine these discussions were successful. What would be Pakistan's objectives? What would be, for the Pakistani military, what would be the incentives for them? The incentive for them is they've just defeated the United States in all of its coalition partners. Why wouldn't it bring havoc on India? With the same elements, with the same non-state actors, and nobody will lift a finger. Right? Why wouldn't it destabilize Central Asia? Why wouldn't it destabilize anywhere else, including Europe? Why wouldn't it? It has the incentive to continue to sponsor and support its policy, of Islamic extremists. That is the best weapon they have, and they will continue to use it at the cost of all Muslims. We as Muslims, as I said, as an Islamic Republic, first of all, deem it a responsibility to stand against this, against the use of our religion for a country's political objectives, one. The other is, this is where the buck stops. If we don't hold Pakistan responsible for the use of their non-state actors and terrorists here, you will not be able to hold them back anywhere else.
So I mean, that will get us, and I'm sure that there will be questions from the audience, including people who will point out to you that Pakistan totally denies having had anything to do with terrorism in the region and is actually a victim of circumstances for the last 30 years. Somehow these people end up...
Somehow they manage to, you know, when they cannot find the terrorists when we need them, when people need them. But when they want to, you know, the chief of the ISI will fly them in his private plane to Abu Dhabi. And then there is no issue whatsoever.
So what happened to the discussions that you were having bilaterally with Pakistan, which I believe that President Ashraf Ghani invested a lot of political capital at the beginning of his term and his tenure as president, and put a lot of faith in it, and came under criticism from some of his opponents in Afghanistan that he's putting too much faith. Why did that process not work out? And why do you think that there is a tendency on the part of anybody who just wants a deal, irrespective of whether it's a good deal or a bad deal, just a deal, that they are willing to sort of totally ignore the happenings of the last 30 years?
Well, Ambassador, you've written books about all of this, and you know our frustration and the frustration of everyone else, what the state policies are. But let's come to a deal. There are good deals and there are bad deals. If the deal is to withdraw, again, we'll put it out there, there is an easier deal. You don't need to negotiate with terrorists to get that deal. Right? If it's to reduce the costs, there are three buckets of costs the United States has in Afghanistan. There is the cost of its own military operations and its own military there. There is the cost of what it spends on joint counterterrorism operations, and then there is the cost of the TAA, which is the Train, Advise, and Assist operation, which funds the Afghan security forces and provides support for it. Right? The bulk of that, you know, arguably comes down to around $45 billion. It can be cut to about 6 plus whatever the United States want to spend money on. Right? The TAA,
5 billion to 6 billion.
45 to 6 plus whatever the US would like to maintain. So the 2 billion that is spent on counterterrorism, you know, the 4 billion plus the other, the NATO makes up to pay for the Afghan security forces. And there is, of course, some assistance that the US pays in terms of technical capabilities. If we can keep that, you know, I think that's a pretty sweet deal. And if the US would like to maintain troops, that would be its own cost.
Have you discussed that with American officials during your stay here, and how do you feel they are responding?
We will be talking to them.
Okay. Okay.
But in principle, as I said in my statement, we haven't talked about figures, but President Ghani sent a letter to the President Trump, in which he stated that we should review the US's engagement in Afghanistan, if there is, so that we can have an assessment of what is required. So we started with what we call the joint threat assessment, so that we are on the same page of what the threats are, because there are neighbors in our country, in our region, that we may consider threat that they may not, and vice versa. So there are issues around that we want to come to joint, you know, threats first, and then work out what is needed to counter those threats. The reason I say joint threats, because they're not just threats to us, and then what's necessary to counter those threats. What the Afghans can do on our own to counter it, and where we need assistance, and what that assistance would look like. So we have started a process. We're doing extremely well in the beginning. The process is pursuing to assess, to find the common threats. That would probably be the bulk of the exercise, because, you know, once we have an agreement on that, the rest will fall to its place.
Okay, so you and I have discussed the peace process, and quite clearly the Afghan government is not satisfied with it, and many of us who look at it from outside also find it wanting in many, many ways. What would provide for a more successful and genuine peace process instead of what's going on right now?
An Afghan-led, an Afghan-owned, an Afghan-controlled peace process. I mean, if it's going to be an Afghan peace, it has to be, you know, laid out by the Afghans, what's acceptable to us. A few days on the 8th of March, the First Lady held an event. This is a result of the First Lady of Afghanistan held an event. Her office consulted women across the country, 15,000 women, to ask them for their opinions on what their perception of peace was and what is it that they thought peace was. And it was very interesting personally to me. When I first started my job, I went to, and they briefed me on, on the few provinces they had been. So it was very interesting, and I encouraged that they should continue throughout the country. And we had an event of 3,500 women that came from provinces. These are not the typical women that you would see that are funded by NGOs, and these are women from the provinces that are affected by the war, and ask them what they think peace is. It was very interesting on the differences that you hear from these different women. Like those who have been affected by suicide bombings and by attacks by the Taliban and Daesh, they want to see justice. They want to see those people brought to justice and answer for those crimes that they have committed. There are also women who have lost their loved ones in airstrikes, and who have lost, their husbands and sons to some private militias and militaries that have arrested, and they want to see justice for those crimes too. And then there are people who don't really see violence in their areas. To them, peace means this is largely central Afghanistan, which luckily has been stayed away from violence. To them, peace means services. Better deliver of services, so they don't have to walk for miles to go to school or hospital, built roads and others. So peace is very differently perceived in different parts and different corners of the country. Now, how do you negotiate that peace without knowing what it is that you are negotiating? Peace is not a surrender. I think some have confused that. Peace with surrender. And they're forgetting that there are millions of people that the U.S. has invested in Afghanistan that would be completely sidelined and thrown under the bus if this current approach is pursued. Now, we understand the policy we agree with. Right? Peace is our imperative, and we're glad to see that the U.S. is also making it a priority. But the approach is something that we must agree upon, and must be done in full transparency and full cooperation with the Afghan government.
Two questions before I open it to the audience, and you can answer them in succession. First, what do you say to all these reports that keep coming every now and then? This percentage of Afghanistan's territories has Taliban presence. Of course, the Taliban presence, I mean, it's almost like sort of, if there's a handful of Taliban, that's Taliban presence. So it's very dubious, but it does affect morale here in the United States. It helps those who make the argument, we've been there too long, we'll never win, we need to get out, etc. What is the status of Taliban having effective control? Is there any part of Afghanistan that they fully control, or is it just a hit and run situation everywhere which they take advantage of? And the second, are you confident, because you said in your statement that even if the United States leaves, we will be there because it's our country and we'll fight for it, and I fully support that sentiment. But how confident are you that that is going to be the effective reality if the United States makes an arbitrary decision at some point to just withdraw? Now, just by way of a side comment, I was reading sort of the press on the recent announcements about the peace talks, and I was wondering if somebody, quote unquote, announced that they are going to negotiate with Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and in return for their promise for not engaging with international terrorists, withdraw America completely from the African continent, American troops from the African continent, nobody would countenance that. Nobody would say that that's a sensible approach. But here, withdrawing in or announcing more or less a general schedule for withdrawal in return for Taliban's assurances is being accepted. So that has a lot to do with what you referred to as fatigue. But how confident do you feel that the Afghan National Army will be able to hold on and Afghanistan's government and state will prevail after the Americans leave? And to what extent is the battle situation as bad as some people paint it here, or much better than that?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important to understand what is the definition of Taliban. From what we understand, the Taliban is broadly an entity or a project that is to deny Afghanistan its freedoms, freedoms of expression, freedoms of living, freedoms of the basic freedoms that human beings have, and its sovereignty. By that definition, there is Taliban presence here. I see them. I wouldn't point to them right now, but I see Taliban here right now. So Hudson Institute has presence. As for Taliban control of areas, we have a serious issue with the methodology of how that has worked. It's true that there are some districts in Afghanistan where we don't have full control. We don't provide services in those districts. They had fallen to the Taliban long ago. We had worked out that militarily maintaining or keeping them was not of strategic value because
where are they located? Mostly along the border with the Patron, or other places as well?
Some on the border with the Patron, well, on the Durand line, but there are others scattered around, and these are scarcely populated, of no strategic importance or value, but extremely difficult to keep military in their presence. So yes, there are that. But then there are areas that are threatened by terrorists. Right? They're threatened by them. Those people are still under Afghan control and are still provided for by the government. We maintain the hospitals there. We maintain the clinics and the schools in those areas. All of the services from road building, all of that is done by the Afghan government. There are even community councils that look and vote on what projects should be. But then there are people who can threaten those areas, threaten the security of it. One man with a gun can definitely threaten 40 people in a village. That is not control. That is threaten. They do threaten areas, and we would want to get to a point where that threat is eliminated. And we're working on, currently as we speak, we have made significant reforms in our military institutions to ensure that we address the threat the way it is, as counterterrorism, not as conventional warfare. There was also issues with how we fought the war, but that's not the topic of our discussion here. And so I think we have that to deal with. The other is, can we defend ourselves? Yes. Would it be difficult? It would be extremely challenging. We will have it hard. But there is will in the Afghan people to do so. We have been trying to increase our women participation in the ANDSF. With a lot of effort, we only managed to get 2,500 people so far.
2,500 women?
2,500 women. Right? And we want to get thousands, right? 25,000 or the number. But we had a difficulty because we weren't able to get recruits. Since these, surrender discussions have begun, people in the last 2.5 weeks alone, we have had 1,200 recruits. This may one of our
we should ask our friends in the U.S. government to continue with what you call the surrender talks, so that your recruitment goes up further.
It's not in the interest of the United States to do that, because it loses Absolutely. All of the interest, the assets, the friends that it has. So but if it chooses to do so, we have full respect for what our partners do, and if we have to part ways, then
it's their sovereign decision, just as it's your sovereign decision to continue to fight the Taliban.
So we are prepared to protect our country, protect our values and our freedoms. We will not surrender to to the neighbor who would like to push the Durand line further to what their ambition was in the past to Hindu Kush, and now is to Amu Darya. It will not happen. The Afghan people will never allow that. We would be, of course, in a better position if we have the support of our partners, who will also significantly benefit from continuing to maintain that.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohib, and a good hand to Afghanistan's National Security Advisor, Dr. Hamdullah Mohib. Now, we are open for questions. I will start identifying people, and then somebody will bring a mic to you. So the first, right at the back. Yes. No. The gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Edward Timberlake. I'm the managing editor of Defense.info, a global defense journal. We have partnerships with India, by the way. As you can see, I'm older. My war as Marine officer was serving in Southeast Asia for Vietnamization and watched it happen, and watched my war turned out pretty badly. With that said, I decided to publish a series of articles reflecting Eric Prince's plan for Afghanistan. And you can go to Defense.info and see it, even the video he made, 10 minutes. Do you have any comments on what Eric Prince is proposing? And if so, please, candor.
Eric Prince's proposal.
One of the first things I did as a national security advisor was to make Eric Prince persona non grata in Afghanistan. We will not allow anyone to turn our miseries and our sufferings into their private business. We partner with the United States because they respect our values and our freedoms, and there are rules and procedures of engagement. We will not allow people to come and turn our country into business for killing.
Right here in the front.
This is Pausmay Akbarzai from Embassy of Afghanistan. My question may take a bit longer since it's on behalf of every since it's on behalf of every single woman surrendering their rights and liberties back to fundamentalists and the implementers of strict Sharia law, the Taliban, and anything that comes in the process of peace negotiations. So I would request for a longer period of time so that
Maybe we can discuss the question of the future of women in Afghanistan separately at a different time.
I have to raise
so
this
just
question.
frame a question and please do it.
Like if we talk about the post-2001 Afghanistan, women, the marginalized and the most exploited section of society, those who suffered the scourge of war since decades, and those who were assigned some specific rights and liberties by the international community and the United States, which were completely alien to the Afghan establishment. And now, at the peak of the peace talks, taking the statement from the Cheryl Bernard, the spouse of U.S. Special Envoy for the mediation of the peace process talks, Zalmay Khalilzad, and the recent Moscow talks. Taking all these two into account, here I raise my question that how would the government of Afghanistan ensure the best possible representation of women in these talks? By best possible representation, what is meant is the women who seem to be the agent of rights and demands of millions of women of Afghanistan, not the back-seated mere attendees of
international conferences.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I
made it quick for you.
Yes.
Of course, you are part of the Afghan government since you are at the Embassy of Afghanistan. So I'm sure that the answer to that will not be very long.
But I have more of it.
Okay.
But I would have an answer for that. Ambassador Roya Rahmani, can you please stand up? Sorry for asking you to. Okay. And I've just concluded a trip in New York where also our permanent representative to the United Nations is another woman. There is no backseat representation for the Afghan women. Those roles of gender departments are not our agenda. Our agenda in the government here is to ensure that women have real opportunities to represent themselves and the Afghans. These women are not just representing the Afghan women in Afghanistan. They are not isolated from the Afghan society. Women in Afghanistan are also representing Afghan men. Right? And they are on the front row of this diplomatic war.
And Ambassador Mohib, if I may just add, the whole question of women's rights is an ongoing question. So those who say that, it should be within the cultural context of as defined by somebody specifically, the struggle is still ongoing even in the United States and in Western Europe and in Scandinavia, where it's said to be, the women have much better protections and more rights. But the women of Afghanistan definitely deserve much better than what the Taliban are likely to offer, and those who want to surrender to the Taliban in the name of peace are ever going to offer. So that, I think, is the real answer. Right at the back there.
Thank you, Ambassador Mohib, Ambassador Arkhani. Welcome back to Washington, D.C. Last summer, you hosted...
Identify yourself quickly.
Jay Kansara with the Hindu American Foundation. Last summer, you hosted an extremely gracious memorial service to the Hindus and Sikhs who died in a terrorist attack at the hands of ISIS. In this peace process, and in that ceremony, you said that Hindus and Sikhs are the original inhabitants of this land. And in this peace process, what assurances can you give to this now micro-minority that their voices will be heard and their concerns will be taken into consideration so they don't have to flee their ancestral homeland?
Well, let me share with you some good news first. Daesh used to control and inhibit districts on the border, on the Durand line, and they had their courts and administrative offices there. Just over a month ago, the president and I visited those same districts, completely cleared of Daesh.
Daesh is the Islam, what goes around by the name of Islamic State, yeah?
Daesh.
Yeah, or ISIS, yeah.
Right. And it was cleared with the help of the Afghan people. Daesh on its own is no threat to Afghanistan. Right? It's the enabling environment that the Taliban provide for Daesh that makes it a threat, because we get scattered and busy with fighting and securing large parts of the country. On its own, Daesh has no place in Afghanistan, in the Afghan society. And you mentioned the Hindu minority in Afghanistan. We are all united in this fight against terrorism. It doesn't recognize you, or your religion, your caste, and the places of worship of Muslims have been targeted in Afghanistan by the very same people. So I think they're just enemies of humanity, and all Afghans are united in their fight against them. We look for, as Mr. Saleh said, maintaining a pluralistic Afghanistan, which was part of our culture and is part of our culture, and nobody can change that. And to your comment earlier on women, where people prescribe to us what our culture is, I think maybe it'd be better if they came and asked us what it was, instead of prescribing what is allowed and not allowed in our culture.
Fair enough. Right there, in the middle, the red jacket.
Thank you very much. My name is Nazida Azim Karimi, Afghan independence journalist. Welcome back, Mr. Mohib. My question is, based off your opinion, Mr. Mohib, why the Taliban not able to negotiate it with Afghan government directly? And the second question, what is your expectation from the United States? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we talked pretty extensively on the first. We did talk
about that extensively, so we'll come here.
Good to see you, Mohib Saib. A few short
identify yourself quickly.
Jalil Afridi from the Frontier Post in Peshawar. So first of all, it's good to see you, Ambassador. To be honest with you, when I came to this event, I was thinking that there's going to be some positive and happy news that you're going to give us. I'm very surprised by the picture that you have portrayed. So my questions are...
One question, not questions.
No, just small question. So Ambassador Khalilzad is saying that the talks are going positive. You are saying that the patrons are not playing any good role. So can you explain it to me what exactly is going on, especially keeping in view that the elections are coming and there are reports that suggest that because President Ghani does not see a very good future for himself anymore, is that one of the reasons why Khalilzad has a total different opinion than what you have said over here? Thank you. And on a lighter note, by the way, the Taliban are mostly Pashtuns, and in this room, I only see you and me being Pashtuns here. So I hope none of us are Taliban.
Actually, quite a few more Pashtuns are here. Yes.
First of all,
Never assume.
terrorism has no ethnicity. Pashtuns in Afghanistan have a very passionate and compassionate lives, and people, those who know them and have studied them would understand that these people, despite living in rugged terrain, have been extremely kind and are known for their hospitality and kindness. I would not equate a group that murders civilians in cold blood, conduct terrorist activities across the country, and blows up schools and mosques. These are not acts of Pashtuns or Afghans or any other ethnicity. So let's not ethnicize this, for one. The second part is there is good news. Right? I am the good news. Right? Afghanistan has its own voice. Our patrons, I think are the correct pronunciations, of the Taliban no longer have to speak for us. What better news is that than for a country that has been isolated for 200 years and for the past 4 decades has been continuously and brutally pushed down by this very same neighbor who in our discussions always calls the Afghan people as brothers and culturally connected in cultural and historical connections to it. So I think maybe our discussions are tough, these are hard, but it's the collective achievement of both the Afghan people and our resilience plus our partners that Afghanistan today has its own voice. We may not agree, we may not see eye to eye on everything, but it's an Afghanistan that's free, it's an Afghanistan that is able to represent itself, it's an Afghanistan that can plan its own future. So I think there is no bigger and better news than that for us. Others may disagree. And the other is about people's opinion of what peace is. I'll call any peace that's an Afghan peace that's going to bring peace to Afghanistan progressive peace. I haven't seen that yet. So I think while there are maybe elements that are, discussions may be important to some, it doesn't mean they're progress for us in this regard. So,
and as I understand you're just expressing a policy difference with Pakistan, not necessarily saying that Afghanistan and Pakistan have to be adversarial forever.
Absolutely
you have to have the kind of peace between Pakistan and Afghanistan, that the kind of friendship that you and I have. Absolutely. And I think that can be the template for our countries
For the record, we have tried on every occasion to be able to normalize relationship with Pakistan, because for the Pakistani sake, for the sake of our people, and for the sake of the region, it is important that that we live in harmony with our neighbors.
Now here I would be remiss if I don't ask this question, because friends from Pakistan always say that you have to ask questions that concern Pakistan, and Pakistan always expresses concern about Afghanistan and its relationship with India, and how that might threaten Pakistan. So what is your response to that? That maybe Pakistan's interest in Afghanistan is not because Pakistan has an adversarial or antagonistic attitude towards Afghanistan and its leaders, but that it's actually genuinely concerned about its security and is worried about the Afghan leaders' closeness to India. What would you answer? How would you answer that question? So the 6 or 7 people in the audience who wanted to ask that question, you can put your hands down. I've asked the question on your behalf. Please go ahead.
We spent a lot of time with Pakistan coming out with solutions to these issues that we may have, not just this, but other concerns that Pakistan have and Afghanistan. And we worked on a comprehensive action plan with Pakistan. And I think it was a diplomatic achievement because we were able to put all of our grievances on paper and agree that we will work together to resolve them. Unfortunately, we are not seeing the commitment from Pakistan to seek a resolve in that. There is never any action taken. And that document continues to remain a piece of paper because it has not been actioned. We would be able to resolve many of these issues. A lot of it is misunderstanding, and if there needs to be, we have always insisted we are ready to be able to prove it, and there can be third-party verification for whatever we claim we can provide, and the same for Pakistan. We would like to request them that they provide third-party verification for what we say, so that we are not sitting across blaming each other and are actually constructively moving forward with an agenda that would normalize relationships so that we can both benefit from peace and harmony.
So we are running out of time. What I'm going to do is ask 3 people to ask questions, and then the ambassador can answer them all collectively. So one, the young woman at the back, then in the middle here, and then right here.
Thank you, Ambassador Haqqani, and good to see you, Mr. Mohib, back in Washington. I'm from Gila Nuri from Voice of America Afghanistan Service. Listening to Ambassador Mohib and quoting that you said pieces will not merge from backdoor talks. What's your thoughts of Khalilzad's role in these talks, that after 15 days, we just hear that from social media that this was successful and some issues are agreed. Do you think that this is the time we can say that Taliban are interested in direct talks with Afghan government? And what is your reaction? And also, I think that's fine.
I think I'll save you the answer to that one. I think you've already given that answer. And I think in diplomatic negotiations, you can't blame somebody for not revealing everything.
I'm just curious if Afghan government is now interested in these talks, as he's saying that Afghanistan has to have a voice in the talks. But I want to make sure that I get a reaction when we have somebody who's talking for Afghan government here.
Should we take the other question?
Yeah, let's take the questions. Go ahead.
Doug Brooks, Afghan American Chamber of Commerce, and welcome back to Washington. My question is, if Afghanistan's wayward ally that is in negotiations with the Taliban now is able to arrange some sort of ceasefire, is this something that the Afghan government would be willing to agree to, even not participating in the talks at this point?
And the last question right here in the front.
Yes, David Isby. Sir, even before the most recent talks, the Afghan government was frequently described as being dysfunctional, a word that's also increasingly applied to the United States and the United Kingdom in their politics. How would a government which is said to be dysfunctional, would it have the unity, the ability to cope with the results of these talks?
I'll begin with that. It's fun. Look, democracies are messy. We wanted to create a democratic state where we can argue, where we can question the actions of state and individuals. And I think there is often a misunderstanding that perhaps an Afghan democracy should be more of a dictatorship than a democracy. We're asked if there is dysfunctionality. I think the fact that people in Afghanistan question their own government and that they have the freedom to do so means we have created a successful democracy that we are extremely proud of and are going to protect it with our lives. As for ceasefire, we have been working on ceasefire, and we would always, of course, welcome and support any idea that does put end violence in our country. Our people are tired. They deserve to be able to. They deserve to be able to walk around just to enjoy the what everybody else takes for granted, the little freedoms of everyday life. Right? To be able to walk down the street and not be worried that you may be the unfortunate victim of a suicide attack. and be kidnapped or shot, and all of these things that anybody else, any other citizen of the world would take for granted. So a ceasefire is always welcome, and it's a human thing to do. We would encourage anybody who can play a role in this to make that happen and welcome it. I would be to answer the question. I think peace is an imperative for the Afghans, and we want to see it happen, but we want to see true peace that is going to bring lasting stability to Afghanistan. The Afghan conflict is not, it's not just the internal dynamics. We would like to deal with it sequentially, so that we would like to first get an understanding of, in a consensus internally, which is what we're doing with the Loya Jirga, on what are the compromises we are prepared to make to have that peace. And then go and get that discussion in the region and the stakeholders that have an interest in Afghan security, to be able to have a comprehensive dialogue with them on what peace in Afghanistan means, including the patrons of the Taliban. They of course spend a lot of money and effort into bringing instability for a purpose, and we would like to be able to have honest and comprehensive discussions with that, so that we create a state that lives in harmony internally, peacefully with itself, but also with the region. And we're thankful to the United States for all its support that it has provided Afghanistan in the last 18 years. We are where we are today because of that. And I think millions of Afghans have suffered and have benefited from those opportunities. We have constructed roads and universities and schools, all of that as a result of the investment that the United States has made. There are 40,000 fighters the Taliban have. There are millions, at least 1 million Afghans that are civil servants in the Afghan government, serving in different capacities, who represent the Afghan state, and then the millions who work in other parts of the state institutions or private sector, all of whom are thankful to this international partnership. We would like to maintain it. I think it's in our interest, and it's also in the interest of the United States for us to have constructive, mutually respectful partnership going forward, as is mandated and stated in the bilateral security agreement and the strategic partnership agreements. And however we define our future, it will be the Afghan state is prepared to have. Like I said, I would repeat, we don't owe the United States anything. If the U.S. would like to withdraw today,
you mean the U.S. does not owe you anything?
We don't owe the U.S. We're not going to complain or issue that. It's not an issue of that sort. If the U.S. would like to withdraw today, we will work with them. All we ask is that we do it in a manner that's responsible, so that we maintain stability and security in Afghanistan and in the region, and in the interest of the United States. So and that we do not make vacuum or create a vacuum for terrorists to operate out of. But we are thankful to the thousands of Americans who have served in laid their lives, made the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan, and also the millions of Americans who served with us to create the country that we have. And it would be a shame to let it go to waste. Long answer. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you all.